Tuesday, January 16th meeting of the Planning Commission. If everyone will rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, happy New Year's, happy holidays to all my fellow commissioners. Here for a good 2018. I think we're starting. We'll start with one commissioner less, unfortunately, but we'll work to hopefully get our fifth member here soon. So with that, let's go ahead and move to roll call.
Member Keeney.
Here.
Vice Chair List. Here. Chair Saragosa.
Here.
Member Friend.
Happy New Year.
Okay, quorum is established. We will go ahead and move on to the consent calendar, and I'll break these out since I wasn't here for item B. So, adoption of agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And then item B, approval of the December 19th regular meeting minutes.
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And just for a note, I abstaining since I was not at that meeting.
And I was not there, so abstain.
So that'd be a 2-0 vote then. Okay.
Is that sufficient? Two members were not present.
Yeah, an abstention does not change the quorum. So the vote, technically you could have one vote. You could have three of you abstain, and if one voted in favor to approve the motion to approve the minutes, that would sail the day.
You think by now I would know this, but I always have to ask. I'm sorry.
Better to check. All right, so those minutes are now approved. 4 items removed. We don't have that. Okay, we're going to move on to item 5, which are items of interest to the general public on issues that are not on the agenda. So if anyone in the public wishes to make any comments, now would be the time. Thank you. Okay, seeing none, we will close that portion of public comments and communications.
There's none from staff tonight.
All right, we're moving right along here. So we're going to go to item 7, which is the renoticed public hearing for 260 Wiltsey Road project, environmental assessment, general plan amendment, and zone change. And I'll move back to City Planner Painter for a summary.
Okay. A public hearing for this request, 260 Wiltsey Road project, as it is known, was first heard by the Commission at its regular meeting on November 7th. The Commission heard from staff as well as the public before continuing this request off calendar. And that was for staff to consult with the United Auburn Indian community, who submitted a letter of request to consult on this project related to cultural resources. Staff did conduct that consultation and concluded that consultation with United Auburn. And the outcome of that, no changes were made to the determination of staff's initial study that the project request would not have a significant impact on cultural resources. To bring it forward, after receiving notification from United Auburn to move forward, that we could move forward, staff then posted public notice in the Mountain Democrat for tonight's meeting. We mailed notice to property owners as well to let them know of the continued re-noticed public hearing tonight. No public comment has been received regarding this new round of meeting, but we do have in your packet the previous comments that were submitted that were part of the public record. The project site comprises 128 acres. It's on one assessor parcel, and it's located at the southerly end of Wiltsey Road, adjacent to the city's Lumsden Park. It's also south of Barrett Drive and east of the Eschaton planned development, the senior development off Blair's Lane. The site contains 3 residential addresses and several accessory structures. The Lumsden family lived on the site for many years and operated a pear orchard at this site. The southerly 4/5 of the site, approximately 106 acres, have an existing general plan land use designation of low-density residential and a corresponding zone classification of R1 20,000, which is a single-family residential zone. It also has an airport overlay due to its proximity to the Placerville Airport. The remaining approximately 1/5 of the site, or 22 acres, has a high-density residential land use designation and a zone classification of medium-density multifamily residential zone, also with an airport overlay component. There are, to the north, east, and south of the site are single-family residential uses. As I mentioned earlier, to the west is the Eschaton Senior Residential Community. The property owner and proponent tonight is Placerville 128 Investors, LLC, and the request tonight is to change the land use designation and zone classification on the entire 128-acre parcel. If approved, the general plan land use designation would change from low-density residential, with its density range of 1.01 to 4 dwelling units per acre, and the high-density residential land use designation with its density range of roughly 4.01 to 24 dwelling units per acre. The change would change to rural residential, and that has a density range of 0.2 to 1 dwelling unit per acre. If approved, the zone reclassification would change from R120, again, it's a single-family residential zone, airport overlay, with a maximum density of 2.18 dwelling units per acre. And the R3 zone, which I described earlier, is multifamily. It has a maximum density of 12 dwelling units per acre. The request would amend or change the zoning map to a state residential airport overlay, which would have a maximum density of 0.20 dwelling units per acre, quite a reduction in maximum density. Tables 1 and 2 and figures 1 and 2 on pages 3, 4, and 5 of staff's report show the redistribution of land use, zoning, acreages, and the boundaries for the request tonight. The applicant indicated to the city that no physical development of the site is proposed. Their intent with this lower density general plan land use designation and zoning would help preserve geographic features found on the site, lessen demands for services from the city or other agencies, would lower the density within the airport influence area, and allow for the development of custom homes. Staff analyzed this request under the general plan, and under the land use section, the proposed estate residential zone classification is consistent with is a consistent zoning district with the proposed rural residential general plan land use designation. What that means is the two are compatible with one another under our general plan. Under the housing element section, the project site with its existing land use designation and zone is not listed on the city's inventory of land necessary to meet its regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA, under the income categories of extremely low income, very low income, or low income. Also, under the housing element section, there's a relationship between zoning and housing affordability. The requested estate residential zone is assumed under the housing element as adequate to accommodate residential units affordable to either above moderate or moderate income households. As I mentioned, there is no physical development proposed with this request. The redevelopment of the site, therefore, is speculative. However, the site with its 3 dispersed single-family residential uses would be underutilized under the requested rural residential land use designation and estate residential zone. Future redevelopment of the site, if materialized, would have the potential in assisting the city in meeting its RHNA, or fair share, for that above moderate or moderate income units. Again, I'll stress there is no physical development of this site at this particular time. So tonight is just a land use map and zoning map amendment for your consideration and recommendation to City Council. Staff also analyzed from a zoning perspective, and the proposed estate residential zone would allow for agricultural uses on the site that would not be permitted under the existing designations. The estate residential zone allows for the raising and grazing of livestock, the growing and harvesting of trees, fruits, vegetables, flowers, grains, or other crops, the storage, packing, or processing of agricultural products produced on the property, provided they are carried on by site residents, are incidental to the residential uses, and are not a nuisance to contiguous properties. Now, due to the existing 128-acre parcel size and the project location and site topography, there is a minimum 50-foot setbacks under this new zone designation if approved, which would require, again, a 50-foot setback for agricultural structures such as barns, coops, stables, etc. That if initiated in the future would be expected to be buffered by this 128-acre parcel, and therefore would have very little impact, if any, with the neighboring residential uses. Staff prepared an initial study for this request. On the basis of the initial study, the request was determined by staff that it could not cause a environmental impact and that a negative declaration be prepared. Attachment B of staff's report contains the initial study and negative declaration. Public comments received to date are also provided with this packet, and that's attachment C of staff's report. To date, comments were received from Robert and Jillianne Shanko, Noel Shanko, and Reginald Rice, Shirley Rice, as well as Janine Jones and Evelyn Louise Hughes. Based on the comments received, they appear to be supportive of tonight's request. Also provided in the correspondence tonight as attachment C is the correspondence City had with United Auburn Indian Community. In conclusion, staff recommends the Commission tonight adopt staff's report, including all exhibits and figures as part of the public record. And 2, recommend that the City Council adopt the negative declaration prepared for the request, making the findings of fact that on the basis of the whole record, including the initial study and any comments received, that there is no substantial evidence that the project will have a significant impact on the environment, and that the negative declaration reflects the City of Placerville's independent judgment and analysis. Staff also recommends the Commission make the recommendation to City Council to make the findings 1 through 5 on pages 8 and 9 of staff's report, adopt and recommend adoption of a resolution approving the general plan amendment, which is 1701, and adopt an ordinance approving zone change 1703. I see the applicant's representative, Mr. Heckey, is in the audience this evening, and that concludes my staff report.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Before we ask the applicant to come forward, does any commissioners have questions for staff?
I have some questions for staff. In your staff report, which was complete and answered a lot of my initial questions when I first read the applicant's, the application that was part of the package, you mentioned that this is expected to be in the above moderate to moderate affordability category. I did go through the housing element and through the staff report, but I still had a question as to is that inventory somehow lacking in the City of Placerville? I know that
For that income group?
For that income group.
No, our housing element provided to the public and our decision makers an inventory of land for all of the income levels, and we still have adequate inventory of land even outside of that inventory that's part of the RENA, if that makes sense to you. Mm-hmm. The RENA response, or the local government's response to providing that inventory, the city is not obligated to provide the state with additional lands that we see that they qualify. We only need to provide them an inventory of land to meet a sufficient number of unit count that's provided to us by SACOG. This may not make too much sense. Maybe I'll restate that. There was a housing element cycle a few years back where the previous director suggested that we put all of our inventory out there, and our comment back from our housing community development liaison, the liaison with the city, They recommended that we don't do that, that we really only respond to the unit count and acreage that we can to show that we've met that RENA. And so we have adequate, I think, if I remember correctly from our inventory, we have approximately 200 acres of land that's currently vacant in a variety of different zoning districts. And some of those zoning districts do include the R120 and R110 zones, which are also for the above moderate and moderate level income. So yes, to answer your question, a long-winded answer, we do have adequate inventory for that.
I appreciate that. I read through that and, like the housing element document, it makes perfect sense. And then I put it down and I think about it and I could not, quote that back. So thanks for clarifying that.
I'd just like to make one other comment too, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Well, one of the things that staff analyze, I want to make sure everybody's cognizant with, is because the applicant is seeking to do a general plan amendment and actually downzone some property to zone for multifamily, we wanted to ensure that we weren't losing any lands that were set aside for low and very low income, and we found that we still have more than enough supply in vacant land available for low and very low income, despite losing the inventory of multifamily proposed in this application.
I also had another question about the current zoning. In your staff report, you clearly state what the minimum, actually maximum number of dwelling units and minimal parcel size. What about looking at that a different way? Does the current zoning prohibit someone from coming forward with a 5-acre parcel proposal? If we kept it the same zoning and an applicant came forward and said, we're going to build, so many units or so many houses on 5 acres, is that somehow prohibited by the current zoning?
No, not at all. The current zoning would, the R120 is 20,000 square feet. It's a little less than half acre. Those are half acre zoning, just for clarification. So yes, with the 128 acres, the math would certainly allow for a subdivision of 5 lots under the current zoning. There would be nothing to preclude someone from applying to do that. But at this point, as I've stated, and the applicant will also mention to you, I'm sure that no physical development of the site is proposed at this time. Yeah.
Thanks. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions, and I want to make sure I understand this. I believe that I do. Under the proposal, we would go from a potential yield of 25.6 dwelling units from the 350 plus or minus. Is that what I understand correctly from the staff report?
Yeah, the new designation would pencil out to just over 25 units, and 128 would be over 300. Yes.
Is there any sort of economic analysis for the city in making this change? Is this good for the city? Is this neutral for the city? Is this negative for the city from an economic perspective? And then the sub question of that is, what's the benefit of the city to do this? And I'm not asking prejudicially. I just want to know.
Sure. An economic analysis wasn't part of the CEQA or initial study. It's not a requirement to do so.
Okay.
So no, the city has not prepared an economic analysis of how this change would affect the city in that regard. Quantitatively, I suppose you could make an assumption that 300 units as opposed to 25, there might be more people using stores. There might be more people using public, quasi-public facilities, schools, et cetera. But at this point, since there's no physical change to the environment, there was no need to analyze those types of impacts or potential impacts. So to answer your question, no, we have not done a economic analysis. Is it beneficial for the city? Well, yes, the finding can be made that this new designation from land use and zoning, that in a future a future housing element cycle, we could potentially use this site as a moderate to above moderate classification, and the potential therein of development of the site to as many as 25
Okay.
units.
Are there any activities, as you've kind of outlined on page 5 and 6 of the staff report, are there any activities that will be allowed by right under the proposed changes that are not currently allowed? And I presume the raising and grazing of livestock. Poultry, is kind of squishy because we allow chickens. But, without roosters, for sure.
Well, they could have
Aside-
roosters on this property.
Okay, right, okay, so, but the other uses as are outlined here, are any of these permissible that are not permissible under the present zoning?
With the exception of the chickens you mentioned earlier, and the keeping of household pets. There's the provisions under the RE zone or state residential would be new potential agricultural uses that could occur on this site. Now, historically, as I mentioned earlier, this property served as a ranch, and that was perhaps before we even had zoning assigned to it. But since the current zoning that we have, which dates back to 1991 on this property, I don't believe the Lumsden family had, agricultural production as described here, with the exception of maybe fruit trees. Yeah.
With regards to the agricultural component, well, first of all, are these uses allowed by right?
In the RE zone, they would be permissible by right, yes.
Okay, so, someone could put up a Christmas tree farm, or in the future, a hemp farm, or
Winery,
uh-huh,
yeah, vineyard, winery,
vineyard.
brewery,
Those are allowed by right.
yes.
What then is the relationship to the impact on Wiltsey Road and its ability to handle additional traffic and so on and so forth to support the activity? If someone is allowed by right to come in and put in their Christmas tree farm, okay, and I'm not speaking against the proposal, I'm just asking the question. Now you theoretically have a significantly greater demand on Wiltsey Road, right, that serves the property. But because the activity is allowed by right, what discretion does the city have, either this body or the council have, with regards to that? Or is it's allowed, boom?
Well, the city would be analyzing the agricultural uses to an extent. There would be a need to analyze whether or not the uses that are proposed there, are they consistent with what the zoning would permit? Would the city look at the additional traffic on Wiltsey Road, as speculative as your question is? There could be long-term problems, I would think, if there was a tree farm or something of that nature, which parts of the year that road could receive additional traffic. I think that's kind of what your question is.
Sure.
And what
Let's say you have a
what would be
vineyard. Let's say you have a vineyard and a tree farm, both.
looks like the director might want to step in here.
Sure.
I just want to clarify that we're looking at agricultural uses that are incidental to the residential uses. So this is, typically what you would see in larger residential properties. Sometimes the family that lives on the property may carry on 4-H or raise their own crops or have fruit trees or have some animals. But I'm going to read what Mr. Painter had here in his staff report, and it's the storage, packing, and processing of agricultural products produced on the property, provided they are carried on by the site residents. So they're only carried on by the site residents, incidental to the residential uses. So you're not looking at a commercial farming operation. You're looking at just a very small family farm and are not a nuisance to contiguous properties. So I think that's
But
sort of...
is a commercial activity allowed? Would that, a Christmas tree farm, somebody could be living there and have a Christmas tree farm. And again, I'm not speaking against this, but I'm trying to understand what this means. So if somebody lives on the property and they've got a Christmas tree farm and it's a commercial Christmas tree farm, that's permissible, right?
Sure, they can
Okay.
harvest the trees,
Okay,
dry them out, but it's not a commercial farming operation in terms of having farm labor, having the amount of equipment, machinery, and personnel that you would typically see in your larger farming operations, say like you see in Apple Hill. These are just little 5-acre ranchettes.
Number 2, domestic violence shelter, would that be permitted under the current zoning?
Yeah, I believe, and I can verify that in a few minutes because we do have the zoning ordinance, but I believe that particular type of use is a permitted use in almost every single-family
Same thing with
residential zone.
employee housing, small?
No, employee housing is specific to the requirements related to state housing law where the state required the city to allow that type of use in residential zones. So it's a use that's permitted, I think, in every residential zone.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh.
When I compared the uses authorized under the current zoning versus estate residential, those were the only changes that I remember, rather than, having to pull out the zoning code right now. Domestic violence shelter, home occupation, that kind of thing were all allowed under the current zoning.
Have a couple of questions. On the negative deck report, what's the definition difference between less than significant and no impact? Just trying to get a baseline for what triggers less than significant versus no impact.
Let me try to summarize that. A less than significant impact would be a potential impact that, let me see if I can answer that. If you've got a quick
I'll
response.
take a quick shot at it. I'll give you an example. One of the checklists are impacts to farmland, prime farmland. So if there's no prime farmland, it would be no impact because there's no loss at all of prime farmland. Let's take air quality. Well, air quality, if there's some construction activity, it may be well below any thresholds that would trigger an analysis, but you can't say no impact because there's going to be some impact, as minuscule as it may be. A vehicle's driving out there, it's going to have exhaust, going to have particulates, going to have certain precursors to ozone and different things like that. Does that make sense? So there's some impact,
Yes.
but it's
Well, and that's
very low.
And that's the only reason I asked, because when you look at the negative deck, all of the markings are for no impact. And I thought even if ultimately 25, maybe only 5 houses got built, but there would still be some impact, maybe more. But I know this is just on the actual change in zoning.
Correct.
So,
Right.
but does that mean, so when they come back, if somebody wants to come and build 2 houses, they'd have to come back again then, and then we
Physical,
look at this again?
Sure, physical development of the site, if it was 2 houses and no subdivision of land, I mean, you're allowed by right to have a single-family residential use.
Right.
There are existing residential structures on there. I mean, I guess to answer your question, there could be further environmental analysis. If it warrants it, if it's not a ministerial action taken by the city to approve that request, then we would map a subdivision of land to 5 lots. Then that request would be a public, would involve an environmental analysis. We would have to analyze traffic and air quality because there would be a presumption that there would be moving of dirt, there would be extension of utilities, there would be increases in density of people that currently do not exist. So there would be physical changes and that's the distinction here. Yeah.
Okay, so there were, that was my, I guess,
Yeah.
where I was getting to is the city would have another chance if that was the case.
Right. One of the reasons when you look through the initial study, it describes things that would come to light should a future redevelopment of this site occur. And so policies and goals were described in the initial study to alert the public that if they have concerns about this particular request, it doesn't manifest itself at this point because there's no physical construction. But should there be a physical alteration to the site because of a map or new density or new dwelling units, then those policies that were outlined and other things in our zoning code would apply, including the Subdivision Map Act, the state law. And so, yes, there would be another bite out of this apple should a future construction occur. Future
And that's where I was
development.
getting at. Negative declarations just always, I want to be thorough for future, if anything were to arise in the future. Thank you. Any other? Okay. If the applicant would care to say a few words, certainly would love to hear from you.
My name is Mark Heckey. I'm the consulting planner to the investment holding group of Placer 128. And we really feel that staff has done a great job in processing the application and has thoroughly analyzed it. We don't really have a lot to add to it, but I'm sure you're aware that the history of the property was that there was a large-scale subdivision proposal which had a substantial bundle of mitigation measures that were necessary to implement that project. And the ownership group just wants to put the property eventually to a point where it's a more feasible development with less impacts to the community and more acceptable to the neighborhood. Those are the goals of the owners.
Thank you. Any questions?
As I asked, and Mr. Painter confirmed, if your group is intending to come forward with a development proposal, the current zoning doesn't prohibit you from doing that, making 5-acre residential estates. So that begs the question, why are you asking for a rezone at this time? Can you answer that?
Yeah, the ownership group, they're not builders, they're not developers. And what they would like to do, they sit in their assessment of the marketplace that large-scale development does not make sense. Under the current physical situation out there, it would be very difficult to plot out 5-acre pieces. There'd be a lot of shifting of the topography, a lot of drainage, a lot of road work, things of that nature. That's not something that they want to do. What they'd simply like to do in the future is come forward with a parcel map that would allow for splitting the large 128 acres into more manageable sizes, and then they would market that to homeowners.
Good evening. Do I understand, Mr. Heckey, correct?
Yes,
Do I understand correctly that the Placer 128 Investors LLC are not the same individuals that brought forth the Lumsden project?
that's correct.
So you folks, this group has subsequently purchased the property?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
This question will come out wrong, and I apologize in advance, but I'm still trying to understand. It's not typical that we see a downzoning proposal. And sometimes some things look too good to be true, and I'm just trying to understand, and I think you alluded to it just a second ago, what the economic benefit is to the group in taking this approach. If I understand correctly, you're saying that rather than, because you're not developers, you're not builders, so rather than take on all the headaches of trying to build what the Lumsden Ranch proposed and all the infrastructure and the mitigation measures that would have been necessary for that project, you're going to go a different direction and then hopefully be able to market, present a map that you can then market. You probably wouldn't even sell the individual parcels necessarily. You're going to maybe offer the map to somebody else to sell. Just trying to understand a little bit what the economic benefit for you folks is, and that's not a bad thing. Not against them, just trying to understand.
Yeah, I mean, to develop 4 custom home sites and sell that land would be a greater benefit than being stuck holding 128 acres of property that it just really is very, very difficult to develop.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And they've had success with other properties in the state that were kind of in the same circumstance. They were, during building boom eras, developers had put large maps on property that had lots of feasibility issues. And then when the housing bust came along in mid-2000, these properties were just, kind of lame duck properties. They were stuck. And then to sell that subdivision, sell that property with a subdivision map that's not feasible, there's just really not a market today. I have the ownership's real estate agent, Dave Puchalowski, with me, and I'm sure he could attest to trying to sell a large 128-acre piece of land that has all kinds of obstacles to development is not an easy thing to do. And it just, their holding cost is not great. Their basis in the property is such that they're not really under a lot of financial pressure to sell it, but they're not, ultimately they would like to sell the property and move on, but they feel that it would, their economic potential is greater with a smaller number of lots at a higher value than trying to go through all the costs of do something that's not really their business. They're not developers.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may
Yes.
make a very, very important point. There was a question raised regarding why would not the applicant move forward without the general plan amendment, without the rezone, if the ultimate goal is just to divide it into 5-acre lots, 25 5-acre lot. The reason being is we would have to, staff would have to make a finding, the city would have to make a finding of consistency with the general plan. And so should the general plan, land use designation and zoning remain on the property, and then a future developer comes in to subdivide it into 5-acre parcels, staff would want to ensure that that development did not preclude the ultimate development as shown on the general plan, because that's the city's general plan. Therefore, they may not get the configuration they're looking for. As part of that, the tentative map process, it would be so conditioned to provide for road widths, easements, and improvements that would not preclude the future development of multifamily and the higher density residential as currently shown. So by doing a general plan amendment, replanning the property, if you will, so that it's planned for 5-acre parcels, if they come in with a map, the map would then provide for a considerably less amount of right-of-way, easements and such to support future higher density development as opposed to just 5-acre lots.
Right. Isn't it more typical, though, for the request for a general plan amendment and a zoning change to go hand in hand with that proposal? I'm not sure that, I'm not that familiar with the process, but in most projects I've seen, we know more what's intended for the acreage, and there's also a request for either a zoning change or general plan amendment, or in this case, both.
I will answer that by saying it's not required. They could have come in with just a general plan amendment on a portion of the property. They don't have to come forward with an actual development proposal to submit a general plan amendment and rezone. So we're looking at it a more, I would say the 100,000-foot elevation. We're looking at a very planning level application here, not looking at specifically what's going to go on the ground. It's because it's planned in the future. They may be looking at developing this. It's very speculative. Good word. So I'll answer that question in a number of ways. It's not required. Yes, typically And usually you see this when somebody is upplanning. Somebody buys an old farm. You see that in the county all the time. You see a developer will buy an old ranch that is maybe a zone for agricultural use, and they're going to come in with a general plan amendment and rezone for some higher intensity or density of development, and it's all in one package. But also, that's also not required, but it's more typical when you see an up-planning and an up-zoning of property, then typically you'll see a map associated with that. That's more typical, where this in the reverse is more atypical.
Thank you, Mr. Heckey. We'll go ahead and open this up for any public comments, if anyone in the public wishes to speak on this issue. Okay, seeing none, we will close the public comment portion and bring it back to the commission for discussion.
Sure. I had a question of staff, if that's all right.
Yep.
So I just want to kind of understand this conceptually. Let's say there's a 5-acre parcel in the far southeast portion of the 128 acres. And so somebody, they're the first buyer. Okay, they got the parcel map. You got these 25.6 parcels, right, divvied up. So the first person comes along and they want to buy and they're going to build there and put their Christmas tree farm vineyard brewery. Would they be responsible then for constructing the road from Wiltsey, a road from Wiltsey all the way to their parcel? That'd be their responsibility, and they would be on septic, I presume.
The answer to that question is the road improvements, the analysis done for site development as you proposed it would be part of the map process,
Okay.
creating that 5-acre lot. So we're obligated to process a tentative map, and under the Subdivision Map Act, we're required to ensure that, on our analysis and review of it, that each lot is accessible. Each lot, under our general plan and our policies in our general plan, require certain improvements to serve that use and that density. So no, it would be the developer of the map would be on the hook, so to speak, as to those improvements.
And then these would be served by septic, I presume?
Well, at this point, it's too speculative to give you that, but there is city utilities basically at Lumsden Park, and so at this point, I would without the director sitting next to me, it is likely that the city is going to require, based on policies in our general plan, that to serve any redevelopment of this site, if to a density as proposed, then they would be looking at an extension of those utilities. If one of the homes that exists today were to be removed and rebuilt, probably not. We probably wouldn't require that utility. Does that help you with? Yeah. Okay.
Any other comments, questions?
Staff will just add one more thing. Tonight, again, you're not you're not approving this. You're just passing this on, making a recommendation to City Council.
Right. Thank you.
The only thing I'd offer for my fellow commissioners is I think that Director Rivas's comments that this is fairly atypical from what we normally see, and certainly from what I've seen in the past, was pretty accurate. And I think that's the main reason for what might be perceived as my level of caution or concern. It's just, this is really unusual to see this kind of, nothing wrong with it. It's really quite nice. But it's like, sometimes things that look too good, often turn out to come with strings. So anyway, that's all I have to say. I'd be happy to make a motion, but I'll yield.
I'd like to have some discussion with my fellow commissioners. I am very hesitant to move forward with this, even with the information we've had tonight to kind of answer our questions. When I looked over the application package on, well, there's essentially 4 questions that the city asks of the applicant. Of necessity for this change, reclassification, uses permitted under the zoning and general plan, are detrimental to any of the surrounding properties, and any deed restrictions. As I worked through that checklist, unfortunately, the application just doesn't really justify this. They answer in the positive or in their best interest, but I don't see anything substantiating the idea that, well, let's see, zoning to lower densities in and of itself doesn't protect the environmental status of that property. As it sits right now, it's almost like it's in amber. Nothing's going to change out there until we actually see some sort of proposal. I think Commissioner Friend and I are both kind of struggling with that idea. What could this possibly look like? And we've also talked this evening about how this is speculative. None of us knows what could be proposed if we, do this downzoning, approve this downzoning. So I'm very uncomfortable with that idea. I realize that looking at the topography of the acreage, and I did go out and walk the site, it is really challenging, and I can see how in previous developments that maybe the applicant has gone through, they went through and just tried to put in as many houses as they could and ran into all sorts of obstacles and came up with developments that didn't make sense or had kind of wasted edges, and so that it didn't really go very well for them. So that is a challenging site, but I also, so as I went through the checklist, I had a lot of, my questions weren't answered by the applicant. There's no real threat to preserve that property, and changing the zoning doesn't do anything to protect the watershed, provide lands for outdoor recreation. It's it was just very confusing because it wasn't clearly justified in the application. And then I also went through to the current zoning map that's an exhibit in the application, and I highlighted that all the other current zoning around this property, and it's mostly R1-20, R3 in some spots. And so when you look at it, when you highlight it, and if you want to take a look at my notes, it does seem to be an island. If we approve this change, it would be an island of estate residential surrounded by higher densities. And to me, that, again, that doesn't seem like it's all that compatible with the current use surrounding this large 128-acre parcel. As you look in also on this same map, the other estate residential that we have is more to the outside of our boundaries, and that makes more sense to me. If this wasn't an island surrounded by higher densities, zoned for higher densities, I'd feel more comfortable with it. But we have Barrett Drive, we have Airport, we have Eschaton, and then even outside of all those, we still have more R120 zoned places. So it's kind of a weird spot zone, if you will, and creates an island of this other lower density. I also have I have a lot of concerns about downzoning it. There have been plenty of stories about the high cost of houses. In fact, Mr. Clarici mentioned that in his State of the City comments that he gave to the City Council recently, that Placerville doesn't have a plethora of affordable housing or even the housing in the $300,000 range. And since we don't really know what's going to go in on this Lumsden or on this property, and we don't know when we might see a proposal, again, it's very speculative. We don't know. It could be 5 years, it could be next year, but it could be 10 years before we actually see a proposal to develop and break ground out there, and conditions may have changed. If those conditions change, then we actually need higher density, or we have someone come to us and say, well, we can only make money if we can put more units on this land. We can't make money doing 5-acre parcels. Then we're faced with upzoning, which is a little more typical. You see an upzoning request as opposed to a downzoning request. So these are the concerns that I've got. I wanted to share with with the other commissioners to see how you felt about these concerns that I have. I just wanted to open this up for a little more discussion.
Comments? Yeah, I have some concern, and really it's certainly your business, and we may have you come back up, make my comments. Certainly, you have to make the best business decision for yourself and for your investors. It does strike me kind of odd, though, that a downgrading of the density would be more economically feasible. I mean, unless you bought this out of BK or something, that a higher entitled piece of property generally is worth more than one that's been downgraded. So, I guess, I mean, to Commissioner Friend, I think all of us, at least some of us here, have expressed some concern over, it's not so much too good to be true, but is there something that we're missing? And I think that maybe is some of the concern that we're looking at here. I think if commissioners aren't opposed, I believe the applicant wants to make a comment. If you're okay with us doing that? Not opposed? Yes, please.
Good evening. Dave Puchalowski. I'm the realtor for the property. I've had it listed for sale as 128 acres, and it's just too hard to sell that many acres. So the idea was to break it into more smaller pieces to make it more viable for a buyer. So that's all we're asking, is to make it more viable for more buyers, 4 individual buyers who just want 4 parcels, so that someone doesn't have to bring in so much money to try to buy the property. And then from there, anybody that wants to do something on the land are always going to have to make a proposal to build a home, a custom home, or whatever they want to do. But right now, we're just trying to make it a more marketable piece of property. Because if you've ever been there, the property is actually a bowl shape. And, the Lumpston's Park and pond is down at the bottom. And so you really don't have a lot of buildable areas there. So even if someone we did separate the parcels, you're not going to see a lot of homes in that area just because it's not buildable. So we're just trying to make it smaller. I don't know if that helps. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer. But it just trying to make it much more viable. There's no other way to say it. Because it's been I just don't get anybody looking to build there when I do talk about the property in the 128 acres. And because of what's been tried to be accomplished there before, that just won't work because of the roads and things like that. So we're just trying to make custom lots of like 40 acres each that someone could build on.
Commissioner Keene, do you have?
You still have some out there, I see, so
yeah,
go ahead.
I don't know that much about buying, raw land, property like that. But again, is there something in the current zoning that's prohibiting your client from going ahead and selling off parts of the 128 acres, just, selling, you said 40 or 50 acre parcels? What's stopping them from doing that now?
Well, because it's one big parcel right now.
Let me clarify.
Yeah.
What is it about the zoning? Because that's what all we're being asked to do, and that's why I'm very puzzled. What's prohibiting that, the current zoning?
Do you have an answer to that? I mean, Mr. Heckey probably has a better answer.
We'd have to draw somebody that was interested in the smaller scale, 20,000 square foot lots, and that zoning has been put out with the marketing package, and there's been absolutely zero interest. The owners of the property told me that they had a situation in Lincoln where it was a very similar circumstance, and by putting the parcel in breaking the parcel down from a R1 zone and getting it into a residential estate for custom home development, kind of broke the stagnation of not being able to sell the property, and they were able to draw people that wanted to do custom home sites. And so that they had a success in another area, and they thought maybe they could do the same thing here.
It's a perception to the potential buyers then.
Exactly.
Honestly, the owners, based on their real estate marketing efforts to date with Dave and with their previous efforts before Dave was involved with the property, have just not been able to get any traction going on the current zoning with the highway, with the high density aspect on the property. They've had no takers, nobody interested. When you dig deep into the requirements of developing apartments in the area, the difficulties of circulation and access are so extreme. And you talk about compatibility. I mean, there's just a direct incompatibility with the surrounding existing density to high density. So that is very unfeasible. You talk to the fire chief, and there's a lot of concerns about putting high density in that area and how to get secondary emergency access to the existing high density. So it was all very problematic, and you kind of ask yourself, why was that zoning put on the property in the first place? It doesn't seem apropos for the type of topography, for the number of trees in the area. And when we came in and were asked to look at the property from a planning standpoint, we said, well, what really is more appropriate for that property, more compatible and less impactive, and more of an integration into the surrounding neighborhood would be lower density and custom homes. It does have the possibility for a couple ridgeline views. Those ridgeline views do command a premium in the marketplace. And again, the owners have had success in other areas by selling view lots. So the idea that the economic benefit of view lots, selling a smaller number of lots at a higher premium, would seem to be more feasible in the marketplace.
One of the statements in the application was to promote agriculture in the area. That's really not on the board anymore. It's for the premium.
That's not a high priority of the ownership group. It seems to be an incidental use that's potential with the category of the state zoning. That's not in their business plan. They're not looking to do a tree farm. They're not looking to do a microbrewery. They're just trying to get into more manageable size and to actually shoot for the custom home market because they've had some success with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just real quick for clarification, a microbrewery or winery, those kinds of uses would not be permitted in the RE zone, residential zone district.
Oh, maybe. I won't argue with the director over that position. But so I really appreciate Commissioner Keene's analysis. But it's helping me in some respect. And I'm going to go to the 4 questions on the application and then just give some other questions as I move myself personally on this. So I'm going to start with number 4 about original deed restrictions. Since there are no deed restrictions, I think that question becomes irrelevant. Okay, so now I'm down to 3 questions. Number 3, would the uses uses permitted by the proposed be detrimental in any way to the surrounding property? And I think the applicant argues just the opposite, that by going from a potential of 350 plus or minus dwelling units to 25.6 dwelling units, that's significantly less impact, or read it the alternatively, is far more protective of the environment than what the current zoning is. And so I can support the answer to that, and I like the proposal from that particular perspective. Is the property involved in the proposed reclass more suitable for the purposes permitted in the proposed class? I think the arguments that are offered here are true, and I would support the applicant's response in that regard. And it's similar to 3 from my particular perspective. The one that's a bit of a challenge is the public necessity. And I guess the only way I'm answering that is, what would I, as a resident of Placerville, and my desire to retain as much of the rural character of Placerville as possible, how do I feel about that? Certainly what's proposed here is better for me in that philosophical perspective than what the current zoning allows at the 350 dwelling units. Some of the comments that were submitted, you know, the residents certainly support this. If I lived there, I would absolutely support it too. It's the next best thing to living up against BLM land, right? I mean, it's fantastic. You're not going to have a huge development in your backyard. Nothing wrong with huge developments. They have their place for sure. It is disappointing to me that the city does not do some sort of an economic impact, because not that I necessarily support the phrase always, but the rooftops for retail kind of perspective. Businesses require a population in order to thrive. Now, that population comes with a whole other set of problems in terms of traffic and demands on services and crowding and whatnot. But it does surprise me the city does not evaluate this economically in property tax dollars and so on and so forth. And that was one of the reasons I asked the question earlier in the evening. It just seems that would be something we would do. But that being aside, and with the difficulty and challenge of this property, the topography, and the real beauty of this property, okay, and the different trees and species and what's out there, I have to think you're going to have far greater preservation, you know, in with 20 lots, potentially 20 lots, than you are the way this was originally structured. So I think I could certainly support a recommendation to the city council to allow this to go through. It's really weird. It's a weird, but I think, you know, it's kind of a weird parcel. Okay, and Placerville's got a lot of challenges with stuff like this. And this very well could be the absolute best use for this particular piece of property. It just may be that. So that's where I'm at, Mr. Chairman.
I agree with what you said. In theory, and we can speculate that the change in zoning could provide the benefits that are listed in the applicant's package. But in and of itself, the rezone doesn't actually protect the watershed. It doesn't preserve lands for future development, doesn't provide lands for outdoor recreation. It does provide for single-family estates, and 0.5 create conditions conducive for a rural environment. So the rezone doesn't in and of itself do the first three things under question 2 that the applicant states that it would. We can speculate that it would, and I agree with you, it is a challenging environment. There's, the watersheds, there's steep drainages out there, there, are probably some significant oak trees and other trees that, might be preserved, but without really knowing how they're going to divide things up and where structures eventually would be, we don't know what's going to happen, what is actually going to be preserved as a result of our action tonight to rezone that. And that's why I asked the questions. There's nothing in the current zoning or land use that prohibit them from protecting the watershed, preserving lands for eventual development, or providing outdoor recreation. We could see a proposal that locks the public out completely. Everything's, property line to property line. There's no outdoor recreation for the citizens of Placerville. If we saw a proposal that part of it extends the existing Lumsden Park out there, then there's an argument in favor of that. But that's not what's before us tonight, and that's why I'm still uncomfortable with the idea of just rezoning without an actual map, a planned map in front of us. We just have raw land. Our maps just go from essentially one color in the legend to another.
Commissioners, any other comments or motions?
I think we also need to remember the right of property owners. We seem to. We had a meeting here not long ago with the Parks and Recreation, and we talked about raising the fee per home for Parks and Recreation. If you divided this into, what do we say, 26 parcels or whatever it was, it doesn't matter, and very large homes were built on that, the city is going to collect fees which then project into increasing our inventory of parks. So it's not locking us out, in my opinion, of that. We're kind of a unique thing here in California. We have one area of the state right now that 1,300 square foot houses on 6 houses to the acre are selling for $1 million or better apiece. And people in that area are going, okay, I'm ready to get out of this rat race, and I want to move to some place that I have a little more land around me. And what that looks like to you and what it looks like to me may be something different. Maybe 5 acres may be enough, 20 acres may be better for somebody else. But my point is that I think we need to keep in focus also the need of those that own this property now. They didn't ask for this zoning the way it is right now, back when it was done. And if I was sitting there with 128 acres trying to sell it, and I couldn't find a buyer for all 128 acres, I go, what am I going to do? Okay, I got to do something here to make it so I can market this and have potential buyers at least take a look at it. And so I guess what I'm saying is I would like the owners to be able to move forward with the projects as they see fit on their property, and not tie it down to always the wants and needs of the community before the property owner.
Mr. Chairman, a question of staff, if I may.
Yes.
Because this is not my area of high expertise, Could an alternative pathway on this, Commissioner Keeney kind of suggested it, the owners could come with this same request at the same time with a proposed parcel map at the same time? They could say, we want to do this map, and in order to do that, we'd need this general plan amendment and this zoning change. And it could all happen as one package, and then we could see the entire thing all at once. Is that?
That's
that
a
help?
possibility.
So that's a possibility. So then
That's not what the applicants are.
No,
proposing.
I completely understand that.
Yeah.
But I
Not
understand.
required as mentioned by the Director Rivas.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
The requirement of the map is not required, or requirement to show a map, the physical development of the site.
Right, but it may be required to get the commission to approve the request. And that's a different issue. But I simply wanted to know the answer to the question, that another way to do this would be to do it that way. Because one of the things I'm hearing, and I don't know that it's completely without merit, is that we don't want to be buying a pig in a poke in some respect. We don't know precisely what we're getting. And there's a lot of attractive arguments. There's a lot of attractive speculation, okay, with what's being proposed. But it would be nice to have a little bit more assurance, perhaps, if you also had the map accompanying the other requests. So I just needed to know an answer on the process. That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just want to comment on that because I understand I understand what you're grappling with, but I also want to impress upon you that you're looking at a higher elevation, if you will. You're looking at this from a more planning perspective. You're not looking at an actual development proposal. It's not a site plan review, not a subdivision, not a use permit, nothing where you're getting into the fine grain. This is very coarse grain level planning. If you were to put forth those arguments, then the city would never have adopted a general plan, because a general plan colored a map on a lot of undeveloped vacant property, not really knowing what was going to eventually be put there. We've got all of our other regulations, our policies, our development guides. We got a subdivision ordinance, all those other tools of the trade, of the planning profession, that allow us to fully vet, analyze, and then approve a development that's consistent with all of those planning tools that we have. So here you're looking at a general plan level. There's a general plan amendment. So is it appropriate? You know, typically we are a city, and what does a city do? A city provides a high level of services, water, sewer, police, and the like, to accommodate higher density development. We're not a county, so we're not looking at development. We're not looking at this in a positive light because it may not require hooking up to our wastewater treatment system. We want that. We're a city. We paid for that, and that's what we want to grow to accommodate a higher level development. So we were skeptical with this. So you got to look at it. So to get away from that, you got to look at the higher level of planning. You got to look at the general plan policies. Is this appropriate for low density residential, for 5-acre lots? You know, it's not something you're going to see very often in a city, because city doesn't develop 5-acre lots. That's the county. And so we looked at this as maybe this is something to be considered and appropriate. That's why staff is recommending approval, because of the topography and the constraints on this site. And I think the reason, again, I want to emphasize it again because I'm not sure, maybe I wasn't clear the first time around, the owner, the developer, can't come in and just subdivide what's currently general plan and zoned under 5-acre lots, because we'd have to tweak it in accordance with what's colored on the map. You'd have to parcel off the multifamily. The map would have to show easements and right-of-way commensurate with supporting the ultimate development. So the developer, the landowner, gets away from that by downzoning it and downplanning it to just 5-acre residential lots, which doesn't require a high level of service and wide roads and a lot of infrastructure. I hope that helps.
I'll just ask my fellow commissioners, what's the detriment if we were to approve this? What do we lose really if we were to approve this? I don't see, I see us kind of wondering, what we might be giving up, but the more I parse that, the more I'm not coming up with a whole lot in terms of what are we really losing. And I think it's odd. This is an odd request, but it's an odd parcel. And I think I would be comfortable making a positive recommendation on the request. So that's where I'm at, Mr. Chairman.
What I see Placerville losing is an opportunity for higher density. There must be, something between what was proposed several years ago for the Lumsden Ranch project versus estate residential. It's surrounded by, other higher density uses. As Mr. Rivas just mentioned, you don't have 5-acre estates inside city limits. I mean, there are some communities in the Bay Area that have that, certainly, but it really is unusual, and that's why I think I'm not that comfortable with the idea of having those estate residential properties, surrounded by this older development, an island of these larger properties. I did a pros and cons list, and I'm agree with you, Mr. Friend. It's I'm not really sure what it is that we're losing. It's just this speculation that I'm still not comfortable with. It does, as it stands now, it is just vacant land with nothing happening on it. If there is a need in the market for development on that parcel, we should definitely promote that. And as you pointed out, it's is the owner's right to develop it as they see fit. I certainly don't argue with that. It's just I don't see that before me tonight. I think estate residential might be a very good use. Typically, that's quality construction. Thoughtful designs and those kinds of things. And again, that would be coming before us when those, builders actually have a project. So we do have a chance to have some input. The city would require them to mitigate for impacts at that time. But I still am not comfortable with the idea of losing the potential for some higher density, maybe not, again, as high as was proposed several years ago, but maybe something more than what we're seeing with 5-acre lots.
Yeah, I always feels like we're going, that we go backwards in terms of losing. I mean, I get what Commissioner Riva, or what Director Rivas said about sort of that higher level, 100,000 foot way of looking at this. But I think within that, looking at that is we are a city, we do have a finite amount of space to build out as we move forward, whether it's 20 years from now, 5 years from now, or 100 years from now. And so we should take into consideration the density that we potentially have out there. And so I do have some trepidation about what I consider losing some of that density potentially. Of course, you got to have someone that's willing to buy it and develop it, and it's not an easy property to develop. And the owner should be able to do what they want to do with it. Personally, I think there's probably a better solution to this than going down to 25 lots. I'm not particularly thrilled with that, but I do believe the owners of that property should do what they think is in their best financial interest to do. And at this point, we haven't seen anyone come forward to say otherwise. So I think I would be supportive of moving that recommendation, but a very, very weak recommendation on that.
I'm going to move in support of maintaining the rural nature of Placerville. And I'm going to move to support the recommendation and moving that we adopt the staff report, including all the exhibits and figures as part of the public record. Making the recommendation, Roman numeral 2, A and B is specified in the staff report. And the findings, in particular, finding 3, that the project site and its 128 acres is not listed in the city's inventory of land suitable, necessary to meet its regional housing needs allocation. And then item C, adopting a resolution approving the general plan amendment 70-1 as specified, and adopting an ordinance approving zone change 1703 as specified in the report.
I second.
Can we get a roll call? Or debate, actually? Any other? Before I call for a vote? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and do a roll call on.
Member Keeney,
No.
Vice Chair List,
Aye.
Chair Saragosa,
Aye.
Member Friend.
All right.
Okay, that passes 3-1. Thank you for your time tonight. Okay, we're going to go on and move to item 8, new business, and that is approval. So item A is approval of the November 7th regular meeting minutes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this item was put forward as a separate action item because some of you were not present at that meeting, so
Right.
we didn't want to put it in or, jumble up the consent calendar. So
Understood.
that's why it was separated.
Understood. We have a motion to move those meeting minutes.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain? I believe I was absent.
Okay. That passes. And then same for item B, approval of the Joint Planning Commission and Recreation and Parks Commission meeting.
I just have a comment about those notes. For some reason, the word Quimby was spelled with a small q. It's a proper name. I don't know who took the notes, who printed them, but I just would like to have that changed so that it's
Sure.
a capital Q, and anyone who reads them knows that we know what the Quimby Act is about.
I'll pass that on to the Parks Rec staff that prepared the.
Thank you.
Good catch.
So
with
I
that
move that we
change-
adopt, with that change, I move that we adopt those minutes from the November 7th Joint Planning Commission and Recreation and Parks meeting.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Abstain.
Okay, that passes 3-1. So now we'll move on to item 9, matters from commissions and staff. We'll start with commissioners first.
I just have a question. Does the city have a process for acknowledging, and I'm not going to say who it is at this point, but do we have a way of recognizing an exceptional contribution to the city, whether it's an individual or a business? I don't know if there's any kind of a formal award or some sort of recognition. 'Cause I do have a candidate in mind.
The city council does have a beautification award that I think is typically, it's the mayor that would handle that and make recommendations, but I think if there's anything in particular, something not related to beautification, but something else, some other contribution, I think you can always probably make that known to the mayor, and then maybe the mayor can bring that forward and they can put together a resolution or something acknowledging that item. But there's nothing formal.
Commissioners, I just had one question, and it's only because I drive over it every day, and that is on Coloma and Spring Street, the pipe or whatever that's basically bubbling up through the street for the last 3 weeks, I believe. Is that I know it's a state highway, but does that pipe underneath us, and are we doing anything to stop that water from bubbling up for the last couple of weeks?
We're not doing anything to stop the water immediately, but we're working with Caltrans. We need to get the proper encroachment permits, and we're getting bids from different contractors to go in there and actually do the work to repair that broken pipe. Okay. So we are working on it, and our apologies for the road hazard and the the wet pavement, and we're hoping to get it done before we have any, winter freezing conditions where we're going to have a real serious slick on our hands. So
Right.
we're the Public Works Department is actively pursuing it.
Okay, great. I hate to see all that. I mean, I don't know if it's fresh water or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's fresh drinking water.
Yeah, see all that
Yeah.
going to waste. So, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Staff, any announcements?
Yes, the announcement, I think that the chair recognized earlier this evening that a member of this body, Peter Wolf, will be moving shortly out of the city and outside the area in which you could qualify as being a member. And so therefore he has to relinquish his seat. And at the last council meeting, perhaps the director can correct me if I'm wrong, but I did believe that they authorized the city clerk to begin that recruitment process. It could be several weeks. So we might not get a seated person for some time. It could be several meetings. Just that's a potential outcome. So therefore, we're not bringing back bylaws or election of officers anytime soon. But perhaps when that new person is seated, then that would be the appropriate time to do that. Speaking of meetings, we do anticipate having a meeting, although the staff report was supposed to be done today, for the item next 2 weeks from the first meeting in February. It's a city item, actually. It's a general plan consistency item. We'll get that out to you probably as early as tomorrow or Thursday. That's the only item on the agenda, with the exception of we are and have invited Peter to come back. So we are going to have a little ceremony for him. So I know Member Friend may have some longtime exposure with Mr. Wolf and can share some perhaps some roast possibilities for that type of thing. But we have a gift similar to what we did with other outgoing commissioners. There'll be a resolution of appreciation that we'll have and present to the member. So that will come next meeting too. And Director, do you have anything to add?
Just a couple items to report on, just to make you aware that we are anticipating the release of the public review draft environmental impact report on the Clay Street Bridge replacement and realignment, hopefully by the 31st of this month, or if not, maybe the very first week of February, but very soon. We're waiting for the screen check, which we should have any day now, and then we'll move forward from there. And then I had one other item. What was? Oh, yes. At the last council meeting, the council considered the proposed private sewer lateral ordinance. And just to let you know, there was a lot of controversy surrounding that, mainly in my perspective due to some misunderstanding of what that ordinance really meant to the property owner and the owner of those private sewer laterals. So we will be holding a community chat probably sometime in the month of February and invite property owners to come out and then learn more about what it means to be an owner of a private sewer lateral and what the new ordinance is trying to do. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Just one more question, Chair
yes.
Zaragoza.
Yes.
Do any of you anticipate missing meetings in the near future? It would help us as we get toward the process of a development project that gets submitted, and we anticipate having a public hearing. We always let you know when that hearing goes out, so you get a copy of that. It would be nice, and we'll make an effort here to kind of quiz you on the quorum for future meetings, so we're not spending time and an applicant's money to bring forward an item where we don't have a quorum. So bear with us. We just want to make sure that we have a minimum number of we'd like you all there, of course. So so that type of question will come up during the item like we have tonight. So I'll ask on the 6th of February, do any of you anticipate missing that meeting?
No.
I'm good all the way until possibly March 20th.
Okay.
I just checked my calendar.
Of course,
in
illnesses trump that, of course. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I think July is the first. that
Okay.
Would be, so at least
Awesome.
barring something else.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, well, with that, thank you, and we are adjourned this evening. Thank you, everybody.